Welcome everyone to the fourth episode of the Lockdown featuring our journalism professor Dan Berlin, who's also a football reporter for CTV, a career consultant, and obviously a journalism instructor at Ryerson University. Dan, how's it going?
Hey, it's great, Brandon. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the lockdown.
No problem, Dan. So just tell us, you have three jobs, and I'm pretty sure they've all altered in this time of the pandemic. So how's it been working from home?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's been, the short answer is it's been enjoyable. For me, I think part of it was trying to find a new routine. I think as human beings, we all sort of are, to some degree creatures of habit, and we like a routine. So I'm certainly someone who does. So it's been a bit of a change, but this new normal has actually been a lot of fun. I have a 6-year-old son, Nathan, so he's home with my wife, Corinne, and I every day. And, there's been a lot of outdoor time. There's been, some homeschooling, a chance to, do some new projects. And most importantly, and perhaps most enjoyably, has been the reduction in commute times to and from work. So overall, the adjustment's been pretty good.
Have you, would you say that like you're enjoying it now, but the transition, because obviously you're a very busy person. We remember having classes with you, and like you'd be in class, and right after class you're out the door onto something else. So
Yeah.
was it difficult at first in terms of having to kind of stay home and not really be able to be out and about?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jesse, because believe it or not, when Ryerson, we were in the middle of, the winter semester. I think it was March, just trying to see if I could get my dates right. Let's say March 13th or 14th, who announced the global pandemic. And 2 days later, Ryerson physically shut its doors. And that weekend was one of the most intense weekends of my life. Like I taught 4 courses this term. So I'm pretty ambitious. I've got broad shoulders. I love to do as much as I can, and I have a pretty good idea where my limits are, but I'm not afraid to push them a little bit. So 4 courses is a lot, but it's something I've done for the last few years. So, here we are getting ready to head into the home stretch of the 4 courses, maybe 1 or 2 last assignments left to do. You're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and all of a sudden everything, got flipped on its head. It was just like being pancaked by an offensive lineman, like literally. So within 2 days, along with colleagues, we had to find ways to completely pivot and put all of our materials and courses online and come up with creative ways to deliver those, like I said, literally overnight. So right now I can tell you, a month later, things have calmed down considerably. But that transition month to go online and deliver all the courses online was pretty hectic, and certainly made the time go by quickly.
Your role as a career consultant, you are first and foremost a coach. What would you say to people who have to lead for the first time during a crisis like this? How do you serve the people that you employ and the people around you as employees and as human beings?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question, Nick. And it's kind of a 2-part question. I mean, for one, I try to look at the work that I do and position myself as being able to do, recession-proof type work. Obviously, if you were to own a restaurant right now, or you plan live events, you did event planning. I mean, in many ways, people in those positions are really in a spot where they're in a major holding pattern and don't know how things are ultimately going to evolve. From my standpoint, thankfully, between teaching and coaching, those are 2 areas that can be delivered virtually, can be delivered online. So, just to bring it back, though, to this idea of a holding pattern, in many ways, my coaching work has really ultimately stopped and dried up for the time being. So to give you guys a little bit of background on the model of how it worked, I worked for a company, and I would provide my 2 major areas in providing service were to people who were actually getting fired from their job that day. So I actually went to the company I went on site, and immediately after they were delivered the news from HR that they were being let go, I was brought into the room to console them and counsel them on next steps. Some people look at that and call me, say, how do you even do that kind of work? But I look at it much like a coach, a teacher, a mentor is having an opportunity to be there to help somebody in their time of need. And certainly that specialized work proved to be very gratifying. I am doing some virtual delivery right now. And I'll say this much, we're in a time right now where there's tremendous uncertainty. And sometimes, and I tell clients this all the time, our ability to handle uncertainty, to be able to cope when things aren't certain. That's why people ultimately, when they lose their jobs, become somewhat, upset or disjointed or stressed out. It's because having a full-time job gives you certainty. It gives you a place to go every day. It gives you a paycheck every 2 weeks. It gives you a sense of identity. When you remove that from the equation, people are often left asking the question, who am I? What am I supposed to do now? And I think just to bring it back again, those are really the two areas that I choose to focus on, is helping people deal with the uncertainty, knowing that there are things out of our control and things in our control. Let's focus on the things we can control so that we can move forward.
Wow, thank you.
100%. I agree with that, where, I had a job, I was bartending at a restaurant, and obviously restaurants have closed down. And even when this pandemic, kind of flushes away, restaurants still won't open up the way they used to, with the nice vibes and the packed house and stuff. So it really took a fall on me. And then as a creative person, I decided to, start this whole lockdown project. And, you're a creative person as well. And we've seen on your Facebook that you started posting jerseys and started this jersey challenge. So if you want to, elaborate on that and where it came about and what the whole plan is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for mentioning that. And, there's no question I do have some extra time. I mean, I'm getting to the end of the marking, and the marks have to be submitted by the end of the month. But to your point about being creative, in some conversations I've had with some of your fellow students and colleagues, one of them mentioned something, and it's something I'm hearing as well, is as we sort of emerge from this pandemic and we start to get back to a sense of normal society where we can apply for jobs and hopefully see a boost in opportunities for all of us from a work standpoint, is one of the questions that employers will be asking is, what were you doing, to keep busy during this time? What sort of projects? Actually, it was you who was saying it, was it not? It was so, again, it seems to be this common theme that's coming up. And it's a credit to all three of you. Doing a little project like this is just a way to, get some quality reps in, try something new, and hopefully expand into an area where there's going to be growth, which is digital content and virtual content delivery. So, it's just interesting to bring it back to this idea of 30 jerseys in 30 days. I love telling stories, and there's a really great personal connection that all sports fans have to their jerseys. If I put the question back to you, Jesse, what's the number one jersey in your collection? And what, can you think to yourself, what's the story behind that jersey?
Oh, absolutely. I have a Derrick Rose Chicago Bulls jersey, and that's probably my favorite just because Derrick Rose was kind of the player that got me into basketball. And I think he's an interesting player because he's probably one of, if not the biggest what if type story. So I just think the whole story around him and how he's been able to kind of turn his career around after all the injuries and starting to play well. Obviously, it's still going to be a big what if. A lot of people say, personally, I think he could have been one of the best point guards of all time when it was all said and done. But, we'll never know. But he's still the player that kind of got my love for basketball started. So for sure.
Yeah. Well, and thanks for sharing that. And we can kind of go around and get everyone's take. But, this idea about Derrick Rose as this what if type of player. And then, so now you start thinking, and this is the journalist in me, okay, like you research, you look at at how he was such a prominent college player and had all the hype and was really an MVP until injuries started derailing his career. Anyway, there's so much backstory from a historical standpoint to him. But then there's this great connection to the shirt, the thing that got you into the sport. Like, what made you choose that jersey? Where were you when you got it? What's the most memorable experience you remember wearing it? And I just happen, I've always been, just a huge sports fan and a collector of nice things. I've always liked nice things. I was never an autograph hound. I'm not, that type of person. I just wanted something meaningful. So I started collecting jerseys, in the mid 80s. As I became a passionate sports fan, I always knew I loved sports. And I was just kind of doing a spring cleaning and cleaning out my closet. And I was like, I looked at all these jerseys, and now for the first time, instead of having to dress up in a tie or a jacket or a sweater to go to work, I could wear anything I wanted. And naturally, I was just drawn. So it's like I should bust out these jerseys. When's the last time I got to wear, my Raptors John Wallace practice jersey from 1999 or my Boomer Esiason New York Jets vintage jersey from '93? And then when I put all these together, all of these stories just flooded back to me. And I was like, I just felt compelled to share these stories at a time where I felt disconnected, and I wanted to find meaningful ways to reconnect with my friends and people who I knew on Facebook. That was just really sort of the genesis of the idea. It literally came to me out of the ether, just like that. And it's sort of taken on a bit of a life of its own. Each story, I find myself more and more in this writing groove, and it's really given me some structure to my days. I mean, it's been an ambitious project, like the idea of writing, 30,000 words over 30 days. But it's actually been a total love affair. I've just enjoyed every second of it. And hopefully for, the people who read it, it's not done for any other reason than just to share in experiences with friends, so we can remember the good times during a time now that is a little tough on everyone.
Yeah, I think it's so important because you talk about like the story, and I know for us, one thing that's been hammered to us in our program is that sports is about storytelling. That's what it's about. And I think it's interesting now when you look at school, you talked about how you've had to transition and now everything's moving to online, and it was really stressful those first few days. What area do you think students will kind of be missing out on most, especially in our industry where a lot of what we do is hands-on?
I don't think you'll be missing out on anything. I think all this proves is that the world continues to evolve, and we have to continue to evolve with it. And I always believe anybody who gets a journalism degree or a media degree, I always say I'm like a ninja. Like I could basically go into any situation, you can drop me anywhere, and I'm going to be able to figure out my way out of it. And that means I need to be resourceful, I need to be crafty, I need to be skilled in technology and in new emerging platforms, and not be afraid to go for it and take a chance. So anything left with what are you going to miss out is just to say that the world is changing. And there will always be stories being told, and there's always going to be new and exciting platforms to which those stories are going to be told. So the key is looking to see where the puck is moving. If you were to say, hey, should I be looking at getting a job working for the Toronto Star right now? I'd probably say, no, you probably shouldn't. It's not to say there aren't good jobs there. It's just to say that market's shrinking, legacy media, and we're now seeing, a real move toward new platforms, and embrace it.
Yeah, and to touch on that, Dan, I've never seen so much digital content being pumped out by different sports networks and news networks ever before in my life. I remember one thing you taught us in our journalism classes is this idea of SEO, search engine optimization, and tailoring your titles and your content so that the most eyeballs will fall upon it. I'm just wondering, this transition to digital, do you see this as a long-term thing that will change the way that we consume content? Or is this a kind of a spark in the pan, and once everything goes back to normal, the eyeballs will be shifting back to our traditional legacy live television broadcast and whatnot?
So, I mean, it's a great question. I think in short, the idea that, will there always be, it's funny, we use the word television, right? But television is really broadcast media, like live broadcast. There's always going to be live broadcasts. Like, in fact, I would say more than ever, there's going to be live broadcasts. What might be interesting is how technology is influencing our ability, even as individuals, to produce live broadcasts and not necessarily just rely on gatekeepers as the ones who have the ability to broadcast live. So, what you're seeing is, yes, between, things like TikTok or even just number of different platforms that everybody and anybody can use to potentially have an impact and go viral and be seen, that's going to continue to grow, I believe. I think, where legacy media has the great challenge is how they continue to find ways to monetize a business model that is sort of breaking down a little bit with this added competition. Part of what you three can look at is as future leaders in this industry is, listen, 20 years ago, Facebook didn't even exist. Now it's worth billions and billions of dollars. And I mean, that's the idea. What's the next Netflix or the next Facebook or the next Amazon? They're coming, and they employ a lot of people too. So the idea of, legacy television networks, ask yourself, how do you consume media and content now? Are you going on CBS Channel 16 from your cable provider? Or are you just finding, last night's little 6-minute replays of, Fallon or Kimmel online, So again, I just say you got to be open to where things are going. I think, part of an interesting challenge with even RTA and now, with physical distancing is as we try to figure out ways to get back into the studio so we can be hands-on is, what virtual tools might be available to produce, broadcast quality content potentially from our own homes.
So one of the questions I have that's kind of steering away from all this is, pro sports are on hold right now, and you are a reporter for the NFL, which in my opinion would be the first league to come back. So do you think it's going to come back? And if so, do you think you'll be in the studio doing what you did every Saturday night right away, or is it going to be from home? How do you see that playing out?
If the NFL were to come back and we would have at that point relaxed physical distancing rules in society, there's probably a good chance that I will be back to do that segment, in that little studio. It's funny, what you don't see is that studio is a little closet on the second floor, and totally I'm there by myself. While the host of the show is downstairs in the main studio. So I actually have no physical contact whatsoever with anybody at CTV outside of the security guard who lets me in when I get there. So I think come the fall, just to answer your question again, I think there's going to be a great appetite for sports content. So if the NFL were back, I'd certainly be looking forward to the chance to go back and talk things other than coronavirus come September.
And speaking of the coronavirus, do you think, obviously as soon as this is over, the world is kind of put on hold right now, but there's more and more media professionals that are graduating, that are trying to enter the sport media industry. So is there any advice that you could give to people that are trying to enter the industry during this kind of unprecedented time?
Yeah, I'm actually going to take the opportunity and sort of, as a coach, I'm going to put that question back onto you. And the question would then be what do you think, based on what you know and how things are emerging and changing from a landscape standpoint, what do you think you can do with your smarts and with your resourcefulness to position yourself to find work in this industry? Jesse, why don't I start with you? I think we go through it because you honestly have to be thinking, about like, okay, like how can I position myself? And I'll say this much, like when I'm doing something like writing every day about something I'm passionate about, or you start a podcast or this, Zoom, recording, or the Zoom meeting, Zoom idea of the lockdown, we don't know where it can lead, but you're doing something. So, I mean, Jesse, Nick, Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
how are you guys feeling right now about things?
yeah, I think when everything first happened, I definitely was worried, and I know we're still third year, so we still have one more year. But I was wondering about all the students that were graduating and what they were going to do. And at first, I really wasn't doing too much. And then when Brandon came to Nick and I with the idea, I was like, I think it's a great idea. He said, it gives us an opportunity to be able to be doing something. And like you said, one of those questions that we could be asked is, what were you doing during social distancing? So I think something like this, where we could talk to media professionals from all different types of landscapes, is really important, because we can learn a lot from them, and kind of have an idea of where to go moving forward.
Okay, that's a great point. And you know what I take from that little bit there at the end, you mentioned talking to people. A huge part of this whole idea is how, not just in addition to what you're doing, but also networking and talking to people in the industry and positioning yourself, where, again, you might talk to me and say, hey, Dan, I'm really looking for something. I really love graphics. And I know that about you. And then I end up talking to somebody and I was like, hey, you know what? I actually have a graphics person I know of who I think would be great. So how you put yourself out there, how you talk to people, I would say is in many ways the single most important part of finding work through connections. What else you guys think? How about you, Nick?
I mean, I've thought about this exhaustively over the past month, just to think about ways that I can be setting myself up for when things do come back. I'll be brief, but I think diversifying your skill set is really important right now. Getting, for me, I've been focusing a lot on skills in digital media. So learning the Adobe suite, little things like that I know that will be useful if opportunities do start to arrive. I think people are the most accessible, as you mentioned, that they've ever have been before. So taking the opportunity to just call someone that you look up to, and yeah, just keeping your options open, consuming different content to get inspiration. And I think one thing I've noticed about myself is that I can get in my head about being a perfectionist in certain aspects and that will kind of like stop me from just doing something. And I think in this kind of time to continue to be being creative, no matter if you're going to get 1 view or 1,000 views, is really important. So, yeah.
Good. That's a great way to look at it. That's something you can control now. You're like, hey, maybe now is just a good time to brush up on video editing or Adobe Suite. Why not?
Yeah.
How about you, Brandon?
Well, obviously, aside from doing this, the first 2 weeks, because I finished school pretty early, I didn't have any exams, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. So I wanted to do something creative. And then as time flew by, I'm not at home with my parents. I'm still alone. So I had a lot of time to think and stuff. And I was going to start some esports type of FIFA gaming thing. But then I found like it wasn't really who I am. So I said, I like talking to people. This is kind of like a documentary style, if you say so. Like we're interviewing people in the industry, in the entertainment world, who have altered their ways. And then I watched the Tiger King and I was like, how do you make a kind of like a movie or something like that? And then the Michael Jordan thing came out. So it's like, you just have a lot of people talking to experts and stuff. And I was like, how do we mash that up together? Because you can't do a podcast because you can't really have 3 people in the same room, And then like Nick touched upon, as well as I'm a big perfectionist as well. And, all 4 of our audios right now aren't the same at all. And that's something that would bother me if we were in studio, because it's something that you can't control, right? But I've learned to like just let loose. And at the end of the day, the content will speak for itself. And the medium is something you can't control at the moment. But the form you put it out there will be controlled for sure. And then that's when we've decided to film a bunch of these first, and then, kind of have a consistent view and then push it onto the internet. Where back in the day, I would just make YouTube videos and pump them out as quick as possible without really having a style to it. So we're trying to create some kind of consistent form here for sure.
Well, that's great, Brandon. And I mean, there's so much there you talk about. I mean, even just the way my mind thinks, one of the things I've noticed, with a lot of these Zoom chats and just anything being done conversationally, virtually, and online is that the audio has taken a hit. The picture quality is obviously not quite as sharp, but it's salvageable, and you can do things to create a studio. And for me, I have a blue microphone to try to improve my audio too. So I mean, there's things that we can do within a budget. But you can even position yourself like, I'll say this, both of you refer to the perfectionism side of things, but then you've also, at a time like this, realized that, we can kind of prioritize things. I mean, obviously you want to be very good at your craft. Even my posts that I do, the way I lay out the jerseys on the bed, I mean, there's a wrinkle sometimes, but, listen, we take pride in what we do, and we want it to look good. We want it to sound good. And I think the pride should overtake perfectionism. Like, if you're good and you understand what it takes to be good, strive for it. Perfectionism is in many ways unattainable and can often cause a great deal of frustration in trying to achieve a goal. So I like what I'm hearing, the idea of letting go and just going with it, in many ways, is a real art in its own respect, something that really lends itself to collaboration too. Because don't forget, if you're working with people and you're such a perfectionist that you need things done a certain way, it doesn't always lend itself to being open to how other people choose or would like to do things. But the nice thing is, when you do get to work at a higher level with really quality people, the hope is that everybody starts feeling the same way and wants to produce, really top level quality work for I've always tried to live up to that standard. I think it's worth doing, for sure.
One last question that we like to ask all of our guests is, what is the first thing you are going to do as soon as you get to go back outside and everything's back to normal?
Well, I mean, the nice thing is, thankfully, I live in a little bit of a kind of community, suburban community where I am able. The biggest thing I do is I do a 15K bike ride every day. That's something that when I was so busy, as you said, Jesse, jumping from class to coaching and everything else, I didn't always have time for the exercise. So I made that a priority. But, in many ways, just to answer that, I mean, it's been this beautiful sort of, it almost feels like we're at a cottage. We're just cooking meals and enjoying family time together. I will say this. I mean, going to see my favorite band, Fish, play would probably be at the very, very, very top of my list, because that's just somewhere where I can go with friends and be myself and dance and just have an amazing time listening to a great night of music. And of course, going to a live sporting event. There's nothing I love more than tailgating down to Buffalo for a Bills game and just enjoying that. So I would say that live experience, be it a sporting event or a rock concert, is definitely at the top of my list.
I think a lot of people would agree with you. The first thing they want to do is go to a sporting event. I think that's one of the biggest things everyone's missing right now is the sports world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, thank goodness for the MJ documentary. I mean, it's just, just licking our chops, waiting for the next episodes to drop.
Exactly. Well, Dan Berlin, a coach, an educator, a consultant, a true jack of all trades. We know you're a very busy person, so thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and hopefully we can all see each other in person very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it, and thanks for having me on the show, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks for the time.
All right, be well. Stay safe, gents.
So.